Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to simplify sums and differences of radical expressions. So, before we begin this problem, I just want to review a couple of background things. So the first thing is how we simplify square roots. So remember that square roots are really undoing squares. So when I look under a square root, for every two factors, the square root basically keeps 1. So when I have the square root of x times x, what I literally get is just x. So let's take a look at how this might become a little bit more involved. So if you look at number 2, I've really got a square root again, but this time I have a 3 on the outside, and then underneath I just have more stuff. So what we're going to do is just look at things factor by factor. So if we look at our 2's, well, notice I've got two 2's, which means the square root would just be 2. So when we simplify this, I've got this 3 on the outside, but now I just found out that I can pull a 2 out. When I look at my 3's, well, I've only got one 3, so I can't do anything with that. So I move on. If I look at my x's, I've got a group of 2 x's, which means I can pull an x out. If I look at my y's, I've got a group of 2 y's, which means I can pull a y out. And then I'm stuck with this y at the end. He doesn't have a partner, so I can't pull out any more than what I've pulled out. So, and notice that whatever I'm pulling out, I'm just multiplying together, and in this case, with whatever was in front originally. So in this case, it was a 3. What's left underneath my square root is I'm left with this 3 and this y. So now if I just put things together, remember multiplication is associative. So that means I could do my 3 times 2 is 6, times x, times y, which I could just write as 6xy, and then times the square root of 3y. So that's as far as I can go. The last thing I want you to remember is what things we add and what things we don't add. So when I look at something like 3 inches plus 4 inches, what do we get? Well, one of the things that I want you to notice is that here we do have a common unit. Notice I'm adding inches with inches. That's really the only things that I can combine. I can only combine with addition and subtraction things that have common units. So I know that when I add inches with inches, I'm going to get inches. How many inches? Well, I've got 3 plus 4, so I know I'm going to get 7 inches at the end. If we look at number 4, the question is, can we combine those two terms? Well, sure, because we're adding x's with x's. So 3x plus 4x, again, the common unit is x. So I'm going to get 3 plus 4, 7 x's. What about the last one? Can I combine those together? Well, yeah, actually here I also have a common unit. My common unit is the square root of 2x. So I know when I add square root of 2x's together with other square root of 2x terms, I'm going to get square root of 2x. The only question is, how many do I have? Well, just like before, I've got 3 from the first term and I've got 4 from the second term. So 3 plus 4 is 7 square roots of 2x. Okay, so let's see how that would apply to this problem. So here we've got, notice I've got a radical expression plus another radical expression. So what we're going to do is our first step is to simplify each radical expression separately. So step 1 is to simplify each radical expression. So I've got my 5y times the square root of 48w to the 5th, and then I've got my w squared times the square root of 3wy squared. Well, one of the things is that when I'm trying to simplify radical expressions, I always want to start by factoring out what I've got underneath, including this 48. So if I take 48 and I factor it, one way to break 48 down is 8 times 6. Okay, 6 factors into 2 times 3. 8 factors into 4 times 2. Okay, I can't break the 3's or the 2's down, but this 4 I can break down to 2 times 2. So the first term, I've got the 5y on the outside. Underneath, I've got 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. So instead of writing 48, I'm going to write that as 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 3. And then I've got w to the 5th, which is w times w times w times w times w. When I look at the second term, we'll notice there 3 really can't factor. But I am going to write this y squared out as y times y. So the second term, when I write it out, is going to be w squared times 3 times w times y times y. Okay, now I'm going to use that information that we learned from the background section. So the square root, again, is undoing squares. So what I'm looking to do is I'm trying to make 2 of each factor, because I know for every 2 of each factor, I can pull 1 out. So one of the things I notice is I've got one group of 2 2's, 2 groups of 2 2's, which means I can pull out 2 2's. With my 3, I'm stuck because I only have one factor of 3. So let's look at the w's. With the w's, I've got one group of 2, 2 groups of 2, and then I have a w left over. So with my 2 groups of 2 w's, I can pull out a w squared, or w times w. And then what I'm left with underneath is I've got a 3 and a w. When I look at my second term, I've got the w squared on the outside. On the inside, there's nothing that I can do with this 3 since he doesn't have a partner. There's nothing I can do with the w since he doesn't have a partner. But if I look at the y's, I've got a y times y. So I can pull a y out. And then I have the 3w left underneath. So if I just clean this up a little bit, this first guy, I'm just going to clean up a little bit. So I've got 5y times 2 times 2. Remember, multiplication is commutative and associative, so that means I can multiply the 5, the 2, and the 2 together. 5 times 2 is 10, times 2 is 20. And then I've got w squared times y, and then underneath I have 3w. The second guy, I've got w squared y times the square root of 3w. Okay, so that step 1 is complete. Step 2 then is I want to combine any like terms. So let's go back to the original expression. And remember that originally what we had was this plus this. So in the first step, what we did was we took this guy and that simplified down to this thing. So I'm just going to rewrite that first term as 20w squared y times the square root of 3w. Just rewriting it in terms of how we simplified it. The second term was this, which simplified down to this, which I'm going to write as, again, w squared y times the square root of 3w. So that's how this second term simplified. I'm also going to just write a 1 in front because that really does indicate what number is in front. It's not written, but if there's not a number written in front, that means it's automatically 1. So now I want to see if these two guys are really like terms. So I ignore the number in front. All I'm looking at is whether or not I have a common unit. And if you ignore the numbers in front, but you look at the rest of each term, notice that they're exactly the same. So that means I have a common unit. So I can combine these two terms together. So 20 plus 1 is 21. 21 what? Well, 21 of whatever my unit was. So my common unit was w squared y times the square root of 3w. And that's my final answer. Okay, so for extra practice, I want you guys to try this problem. So I want you to simplify this as much as you can, pause the video, and then restart it after you've given it a try. Okay, so our first step again is to try to simplify each term on its own. So if we look at the first term, if we factor out the inside, I've got v times 6 factors into 2 times 3 times x times x times x. If we look at the second term, we've got x times the square root of, and then 96 factors into, if you did a factor tree with it, you would have found we end up with 5 2's and a 3, and then times x times v times v. And now what we want to try to do is simplify those square roots as much as we can. So if we look at the first one, notice there's nothing we can do with the 2, there's nothing we can do with this 3, but you've got 2 factors of x, so I can make a group of 2 x's, which means I can pull an x out. So if I do that, I'm going to have v times x times the square root of 2 times 3 times x. If we look at the second guy, I can pull out, well, if we look at the 2's, I can make 2 groups of 2, which means I can pull out 2 2's. And then I've got 1 2 and 1 3 left over. Can't do anything with those, can't do anything with this x. But then I've got 2 factors of v, so that means I can pull a v out as well. And so what's left underneath of the second guy, it looks like I've got a 2 times a 3 times an x. So then my first term just becomes 1vx times the square root of 6x. My second term, when I simplify it, again, multiplication is commutative and associative, so I'm going to multiply the 2 by the 2 first, so 2 times 2 is 4. Vx times the square root of 6x. And lo and behold, I think I've got some like terms here. So notice if I ignore the numbers and I just look at everything else, those are exactly the same. So that means I can combine what I have. So 1 minus 4 is negative 3. Vx square root of 6x. Remember, my common unit doesn't change when I combine like terms. So this would be my final answer.